And welcome back. Well, do you feel like your boss is always on your case? Well, maybe you think your supervisor is a bully.
Yeah, not everyone can have great bosses like we have here. Who wrote that? Just kidding. So how does that impact you at work when your superior is always breathing down your neck? Career coach Amanda Goralski is here with some tips for handling those out-of-control bosses.
Yes, and they're everywhere.
Well, and hasn't just about everybody who's been in the working world had a boss who, at a minimum, is difficult?
It seems like that. I mean, when you blast this question out there and when you talk to people, even sitting in the green room coming on, people are like, oh, I've totally been there, know exactly what you're talking about, all of that. So I really think that everyone at some point in their life has probably dealt with a bully boss.
And you know, I think the interesting thing about bullies is that I know this from my kids when they're teased or picked on, they think they're the only one.
Yes.
And I think when you have a bully boss, or a boss who's difficult, you think you're the only one who has a problem with it.
It seems to be very personal, and a lot of times it can be personal, but oftentimes it's not personal at all. It's just their personality, and they've been taught that throughout their entire career from grade school on, bullying is the way to go because that's how they've been successful, living in fear.
What do you think defines a bully? Because I think somebody, especially in a workplace, because when you think about bullies, you think about kids, you know, really, that high school bully that everybody knew. I mean, this isn't your boss saying, you need to give me your lunch money, you know? I mean, what defines them in the workplace?
Well, and there is a fine line between a tough boss and a bully boss. A tough boss is obviously just like a coach. They see great potential in you and they want to push you to that potential that they see. So by saying, okay, you need to work a little bit harder, this is really good, but give me more. That's a tough boss. A bully boss, however, is someone that degrades you, that belittles you, that makes that Sunday night like last night, you are fearful to go into work the next day because you just never know, okay, how is my boss's personality going to be today? What's the attitude going to be like in the office? And you kind of have that anxiety, that stressful level where you're like, oh, I just don't want to go. I don't want to deal with it anymore. That is then when you know that you're dealing with a bully boss.
And it's bad. I wasn't surprised, I guess, to read this because the bully boss that I worked for was my first reporting job. It was awful. I mean, I had so much anxiety about working. It says an abusive boss is more likely to be a woman than a man. In fact, woman-to-woman bullying represents 50% of all workplace bullying, whereas man-to-woman is 30% and man-to-man is just 12%.
I know, isn't that crazy? I mean, it kind of makes sense if you think about it, but at the same time, it's very, very sad.
Why do you think that's
women
true?
Are constantly attacking women all the time? Well, again, I think it comes back to that other segment that we did on do women really want other women to succeed? I mean, we want to sabotage any chance that we get. And again, if you have been the type of woman that has, you know, is self-confident about yourself and you don't think that you're really worth what you're bringing to the table, the way that you get around that is by having everyone live in fear of you. And then all of a sudden that transitions over to working in an office where all of a sudden you've got people that are pretty, are smart, are very successful at their job, and now all of a sudden you feel threatened, and a mechanism for when you feel threatened is to turn around and to bully them because it's always worked.
Try and make them feel bad about themselves. And that's a good point, I think. I had a conversation with someone about that this weekend, that as a leader, there's a difference between being respected and feared. And people often confuse those. So are there different types of bullies that can be present in a workplace?
Yes, there is the boundary crosser, which tends to be the boss that tells you everything that's going on in their life, expects you to come over on the weekend, really to be your best friend. That's kind of the boundary crosser. But then at the same time, they're also the boss that's going to say really crude and disrespectful things in the office that you're kind of taken back and like, why would you ever say that in front of people? Then there's the controller, which is AKA the micromanager, that needs to be in control of absolutely everything that you do, from when you walk in the morning to when you leave to when you take your lunch break to how long you're spending on the projects. You know, really not stalking, but kind of stalking you. Okay, Mandy, you made a personal phone call for 5 minutes. You're going to have to stay after work for another 5 minutes. They're the type of boss that can't let anything go. Then there's like the Jekyll and Hyde type of boss, where hates confrontation, but at the same time will talk about you behind your back, will degrade you in front of other people, but really can't confront you on what really is the issue. And then there's like the tantrum thrower. And I think a couple on the Facebook pages, a lot of people were talking about how their bosses were like swearing in meetings. They were slamming their fist down on their table and really truly acting like they're 3 years old.
Yeah, and that it's difficult to deal with that kind of anger because you're kind of trying to manage their anger and kind of wondering when it's going to happen.
And if you're not a people person and this is what's happening, you're kind of like, what is going on? How do I even handle this?
Yeah, so what do you suggest? What are some tips for coping with a bully boss?
Never ever talk behind their back, because that's one of the biggest things, because it will eventually get back to them because they are the higher ups in the office. And so eventually everything that you're talking about is going to get back to them. Never put together like a crew and say, okay, tell me, what has been your experience with this manager? Let's gather all this information and let's present them, because again, bully bosses, whatever level they're at, the higher ups are threatened by them as well. They've just got this power over everyone that no matter if you're the CEO and they're just a mid-grade manager, that CEO at the same time is kind of like, ooh, you know, there's something off, but I'm a little taken back as well. I don't want to step on his or her toes and get them angry at me, because then they're going to start bullying me, even though the CEO has the right to fire them. But that doesn't happen very often. So I think it's just knowing what type of bully boss that you're dealing with, whether it's the Jekyll and Hyde, the hate confrontation. So the best way to do that is to actually confront them behind closed doors and say, okay, you know what, I'm feeling a little animosity, and I know that it's not personal. I don't want to think that it's personal, but I really want to know, what is it that is going on? Why can't we develop a relationship that we need to move forward to make this work environment better?
I think that's great. And I think, you know, we're out of time for this segment here, but you're going to come back in a little bit later. We're going to read Facebook responses. So I want to give you Amanda's information first. You can find out more about Amanda, her coaching, and her newsletter at bizme.biz. She's the BizGals career coach. And you can join in this conversation on Facebook, because we're going to be reading your responses. Have Amanda come back to tell you, how do you know if a bully will get better or if you should just leave that situation. So send us your comments on Facebook. Tell us a little bit of stories about if you've ever dealt with a bully boss, and we'll talk to those responses a little later in the show. Thanks, Amanda.
Oh, you're welcome, ladies.
Good to have you.
See you in a bit.
Thanks.
And still ahead, the #1